take it away.
Thank you. So thanks very much for that introduction, Aidan. Jane will be speaking first, but I thought I would just, as the current chair of MDG, go ahead and be the one to kind of welcome everybody and thank you for coming. As you'll see here, we've decided to sort of include our pets or pets we would like to have throughout the session, because our pets have been very inspirational to us throughout the last couple of years of work, because we've been working at home through the pandemic. So in the middle is Juniper and Thistle. Those are my two dogs. On the left are Sarah's two cats. On the right is the cat that May would like to have. So we can all welcome them into our group this evening. And very specifically, Juniper has been our mascot through the whole time, and she usually slept through every meeting and was not the most active member of the committee, but we'll forgive her for that because she's very cute. So as Aidan already said, these are our committee members. Beth and Karen, we're the co-chairs, or are the co-chairs of the committee, and the rest of us are representatives. So Jane and myself were representatives from the UK, representing CILIP. Beth and Karen and Sarah are in the US, so they represent American Library Association. And finally, May is in Canada, obviously, so representing the library associations in Canada. Thanks, Vicki. Appreciate the comment about Juniper. I'll pass that on to her as well. So here, I would like to pass it over to Jane now, who will give us the background and context that we worked with for the last few years.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming this evening. It's great to have this amount of interest in a topic that traditionally doesn't come top of the popularity stakes, but we hope that the work that we're going to share with you tonight will go some way to remedying that. Yes, so I'm basically just going to go through the next few slides with you. So the background and context for the piece of work comes really from our colleagues in the United States. And CILIP MDG's sort of sister group there, which I think has changed its name now, but at the time that the work started, it was the Cataloguing and Metadata Management section of the ALA. And there had been some events where cataloguers there had expressed their concern about the need for a code of ethics then to help people to and inform their practice when it comes to the many facets of cataloguing that some of you, I hope, will be familiar with. Now, when this event took place, I was on the committee of CILIP SIG, as it was then, and I thought it would be great if CILIP could be involved in this, and it could perhaps be a little bit more of a international piece of work, because my belief is that cataloguing and metadata certainly knows no boundaries. And so the kind of ethical dilemmas that our colleagues in the States might have been discussing were probably the very same ones that we in the UK were interested in tackling as well. So I contacted CAMS, and then in February 2019, we did actually get together and have the first meeting of the Cataloguing Ethics Steering Committee, which consisted of May from Canada as well, myself and Diane from the UK, and Karen and Beth and Sarah from the United States. Next slide, please. Lovely. So how are we going to put this together? Well, we wanted to draw on the expertise and the knowledge of the cataloguing community at large. It wasn't likely that the six of us would be able to encompass all the issues that we knew existed out there. So what we did was put out a call for volunteers from the community of practice to form the 6 working groups. If you want to know more about this, I think the link to our webpage has been put in the chat, and you'll see there the topics that were covered by each of the working groups. So each member of the steering committee, we took on the sort of lead role then for the working groups, and we were the main sort of funnel for communications between the committee and our working group colleagues. And to our delight, we had over 100 volunteers who wanted to be part of the working groups. And as it turned out, it wasn't just people from Canada, the UK, and the United States. We had representation from Australia and Israel and other countries as well, which was brilliant. That's exactly what we wanted. So as I say there, the working groups, well, we needed to tap into everyone's knowledge and to get an accurate reflection of their concerns, and also kind of global values that we wanted to see reflected in the work that we all do. Next slide, please. So here you've got another bit of the timeline. So you can see in July, we finalised the working group membership, and the work got underway. Between August and December 2019, the working groups had their own meetings. These were facilitated online because the members were coming from such diverse areas. And each of the groups produced a report for the steering committee. So we then took that and used it to produce a draft document, Cataloguing Code of Ethics, and produce it for public comment by April 2020. But of course, as we all know, COVID-19 hit. So I think at this point, Diane is going to carry on with the story.
Great. So at this point, through 2020, obviously things changed, but we did try to continue to engage as much as possible with everything that the different working groups did for us. Each of us were responsible for communicating with a different working group. So we were all assigned to a different one, and each working group had its own chair that was separate from those of us in the steering committee. So for example, mine was a working group on resource discovery and access, which resource discovery and accessibility. Sorry, I always call it RDA in the background, which is a cataloger joke. Sorry about that. So in June of 2020, we first did our first presentation at the Virtual Interest Group Week, which was part of the AOA based organization, ALCTS, which was their section for technical services. And we got a lot of comments during the session, and we opened it up for consultation. So we got a lot of comments both during the session and directly on the Google document and through email and so on. So during that time, we continued to meet ourselves, looking at the feedback that we were getting from the public, and made revisions based on what we were getting on that feedback. And then we produced a second draft by August. And in September, we had our conference of the MDG in September of 2020, which was, of course, was virtual. And so we all presented there on where we were in the process, and to continue to get further feedback, most specifically obviously from the UK community. And we also, through May, opened it to the Canadian community. And of course, there are a group of people in Canada who are Francophones, and French is their first language, and they have different considerations. So as a result of these further consultations, we got an additional 168 comments on the second draft. And so we took all those comments starting in October of last year and worked through up until Christmas to incorporate this feedback and continue to revise what we have for our document. And then ultimately in January, we released what we consider to be the final version, which was then completed. So you can look at these sites yourself. I think they were linked in chat at the start of this hour. So you can look at our website with all of the background information as well as the code itself. And so from left to right here, we have Thistle, the Chihuahua, who is in this case sitting in the chair that I'm sitting in at this very moment. Unfortunately, she takes a lot less space in this chair than I do. We have Sarah's dog, Mocha, and then again, Juniper over there on the right. So here are the 10 statements of ethical principles. And if you look at the entire document on our Google Doc, you will see that there's an introductory section with talking about the background and our use of critical librarianship and critical cataloging and sort of the background that we're coming at this from. But these are the 10 statements that are in no order of importance, particularly, which we believe can be used to guide and improve our cataloging practices. We catalog resources in our collections with the end user in mind to facilitate access and promote discovery. We commit to describing resources without discrimination whilst respecting the privacy and preferences of their associated agents. We acknowledge that we bring our biases to the workplace, therefore we strive to overcome personal, institutional, and societal prejudices in our work. We recognize that interoperability and consistent application of standards help our users find and access materials. However, all standards are biased. We will approach them critically and advocate to make cataloging more inclusive. We support efforts to make standards and tools financially, intellectually, and technologically accessible to all catalogers and developed with evidence-based practice research and stakeholder input. We take responsibility for our cataloging decisions and advocate for transparency in our institutional practices and policies. We collaborate widely to support the creation, distribution, maintenance, and enrichment of metadata in various environments and jurisdictions. We insist on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. We promote education and training, equitable pay, and a fair work environment for everyone who catalogs so they can continue to support search and discovery. We advocate for the value of cataloging work within our organizations and with external partners. And finally, we work with our user communities to understand their needs in order to provide relevant and timely services. And now I will pass it over to Beth and Karen as our co-chairs to talk about where we are going from here.
Thank you all for coming. This is really a wonderful opportunity to speak with you all. So some of the next steps is that this document was published openly on the Cataloging Ethics Committee Steering Committee website, and those are the links that you're seeing in the chat. It has gone to all 3 professional organizations, so CILIP, ALA, and the CMSC of CILIP for approval. At this point, we've received approval from the MDG and also from CORE, which used to be ELEX, which showed up in the slides earlier, but now it's called CORE, at the committee level. And then the document has also gone forward to the next level at ALA, and I believe also at CILIP. The Canadian constituency are working out processes for community engagement before endorsement. So they have a slightly different path to endorsement in Canada. So we're waiting on sort of and having conversations with folks about sort of association level endorsements of the document. So we do still have some questions outstanding. We don't yet have a clear path for understanding how often the document will be reviewed and revised and who will do that, and what kind of timetable is reasonable for that kind of revision. So those are questions that we are trying to sort of sort out with our various professional organizations. So those are still outstanding. We're not quite sure how that's all going to work out, but we are actively speaking with our professional organizations to try and figure out how that might work.
Okay, and I guess I can take the next slides, I suppose. Hi, Karen. And also just to kind of continue with a little bit with Beth was saying, we also want to go to IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, which I think would be more applicable to this group as well, to see if we can get it endorsed by that association and just kind of make it more well-known internationally. But in the meantime, while we're working on that, we'll also are really encouraging the cataloging community to supply case studies. Okay, we would love to have case studies on our website that are associated with the ethical statements of principles, so they can illustrate those, right? So that we can have a document that has just various situations you may find yourself in that have ethical considerations, and one document that we can also comment upon as a community as well. So we are currently asking the cataloging community to please feel free to send one to us. We have a Google form on our website where you can just fill that out. You do have to, I think, Diane, if you go to the next slide, it'll have like essentially kind of what we're looking for. Yeah, so, right, so just kind of specify, okay, what statements of ethical principles from our code of ethics apply, and could be multiple, right? It could be multiple statements that apply, as well as just a basic, like a paragraph long problem statement or situation background, as well as any kind of potential or actual solutions to that problem. Okay, so, and that's really what we're looking for. We're not looking for pages and pages, case study, just kind of a quick thing just like this, so we can learn from each other, right, on this topic. So, and we'll get those posted on our website as we receive them and review them. So with that said, so I do encourage you all to do that. But with that said, in the little bit of time we have left, it'd be nice for those who are not as familiar with cataloging ethics, or maybe you didn't even know there is such thing as cataloging ethics. Some members of the steering committee would like to introduce that, that idea to you of various types of scenarios, just a few, not all, that you may have encountered or want to consider. So Diane, do you want to? Oh, okay. So just, I don't know if you want to introduce the other pets on the slide.
Yeah. Oh, right. Sorry, I forgot. How could I do that? So this is Mocha. On the left-hand side, that's Sarah's dog, and the cat on the right-hand side, I believe, is also the pet that May wants to have. So hopefully we can all help her get the little baby that she wants. I don't think she has one currently. So Sarah, if you wouldn't mind talking about the next couple of slides around the illegal alien subject heading issue, as well as the changing the subject film.
Sure. I apologize. I am currently in my office as at a public library, so I have no video, and we are currently also undergoing renovation. So if there are loud sounds, I apologize in advance. So one of the most frequent examples that came up, especially for Americans when considering the need for cataloging ethics, is this term illegal aliens, to describe undocumented non-citizens. As society and politics and people evolve, so do the words that we describe our content and our resources in our catalogs. We noticed that this example came up very frequently in working groups, and people are not illegal. People are not extraterrestrials. How can we change our content, our subject headings, our libraries to reduce harm and be more inclusive? So the next slide talks about the documentary Changing the Subject from Dartmouth students, and it is actually free to watch online. It is about a group of students who took their advocacy all the way to Library of Congress, just showing how this term illegal aliens is harmful, and how a simple switch in that language still allows people to find what they're looking for, but is not actively harmful.
Thanks, Sarah. So May, if you could talk a little bit about you and I can go back and forth the next few slides, if that's okay.
Yes. So I'm May. I'm from Canada. It's great to be here. Thank you for coming out to our session. So I'll be speaking a little bit about what are some of the common concerns, cataloging related, resource description related concerns in Canada. And this screenshot is actually is a sample of an effort to revise subject headings, to revise the language, culturally inappropriate terminology referring to Indigenous peoples. So in the Library of Congress subject heading system, which many Canadian libraries use for subject analysis, the headings used there as a standard is Indians of North America, but that is not how Indigenous peoples want to be known. They're not from India. And there's lots sorts of just lots of historical things wrong with it. So here's an example of the association, the Archival Manitoba Association, where they created a database called Maine, where it was sort of like a consortial database where different archives could upload their archival descriptions. And then when the LC terms were uploaded, there was this response saying that's not appropriate for describing resources about Indigenous peoples. So there was a working group struck in that community to look at how to revise the headings and still be compatible with the LCSH syntax. And then this is to kind of maybe follow up a little bit on, I think was Graham's question, does cataloging ethics encompass subject headings, subject indexing? I mean, I think there's a connection here as well, right? Like when you have something so broad as, like Indigenous peoples, which is like not granular at all, it doesn't make for very effective subject indexing. So we don't have a slide on this, but I can speak to this tangentially that, in addition to revising the language on how to more respectfully refer to Indigenous peoples, we also want to create more granular headings to refer to peoples, various nation groups, very specifically with the names that they want to be known by. So in other words, it will require the field to learn very specifically names and conventions, and maybe even different kinds of like topics or knowledges, because like otherwise there's no way to describe something accurately, right? We don't want to use language that's too general. So I just wanted to just highlight this as an example of a scenario that many Canadian libraries are grappling with. And here's a wonderful example of AMA there trying to do something about it.
I will speak to this one quickly because this is actually my slide. I'm not sure if you can see the full citation there, but these can be available later. So there's an article in 2014 in Cataloging Classification Quarterly about I guess you could say the old new RDA. So we know that we've had a new toolkit adopted in December of last year, but really in practice, I don't think anyone is using it yet. So if we look at the RDA toolkit that people are still actually using in practice, we have instructions on recording gender. And it says, if you look at the rules here, it says in this case to create from a standard list if available, because there are sort of all these little bits of controlled vocabularies throughout RDA, whether it's within a certain section or refers to an external controlled vocabulary that the cataloger can choose from. So if we look at my example in my authority file in Library of Congress, we can see there that the 375 subfield A is females. So it's a very controlled list. It doesn't allow for different gender identifications, and it also doesn't allow for people to specify their own gender because we're very limited there. And also, why is it important to record gender is the question that is asked in this article. Why do we need to record this information, and why is this even important in terms of authority work or identifying anyone with one gender or another. So this is just one of many examples that we can look at that we considered in developing this code in terms of identifying characteristics in identifying people and the works that they've created, and why is this really important. And so this just brings up a whole other set of issues. And I see some questions are coming up about language, and in the discussion, we can address that during the questions. So back to May for this one.
So these screenshots from some Twitter posts a few months ago, they're what I call like meta slides. And this kind of scenario that these screenshots are alluding to have to do with then what does it take to create change? Or who should be a part of making change. And so, you know, there was a person who I believe is part of like the University of British Columbia who teaches there, had, I guess, like promoted a slide in a class that makes the point that, you know, like choosing on the best terminology, the most appropriate terminology is difficult, and getting a proposal approved is kind of another thing altogether. And then Violet Fox, who is a great advocate on trying to just keep social justice in mind when describing resources or encouraging us to think that way more. Her response is, it's even harder to change terminology when no one tries because they think it'll be too hard. And so a number of us on the steering committee, I mean, this is going off a little bit off script, but we're developing this as we go along. A number of us are involved with teaching, you know, new generations of catalogers. We are involved with training in our workplaces, or we are involved in our professional associations. And I think one of the things that kind of we're seeing is that, you know, in order to be part of change, we need to be out there in our networks, talking about it, seeing what the common concerns are, you know, like making friends with people in various communities who do have more influence about making change, or maybe even being part of working groups to propose things. And it takes a lot of time. It is really hard work. Engagement is really, really hard work. And I think that's a kind of a level of cataloging work that maybe we don't talk about a lot or acknowledge a lot. So yeah, it's kind of a reminder that part of our infrastructure that needs to change is making room and time and finding a commitment to be in communities to advocate for change.
If I could just as well, we're just about finished here, but if this is a topic of interest to you, May and I will be presenting on a panel along with Emily Drabinski, who is one of the authors of the article that I cited in the last slide, around decolonizing the library catalog, which will be part of a Pride festival event. So we can also share that link to that. I think it's free for everyone to attend as well. So if this area of decolonization of the library catalog and these issues are of interest to you, you might want to consider joining us for that as well. So that's next week on the 21st. So with that, I think I'll close here with Karen's dog and Sarah's cats. And we're open to any questions and discussion that we have now the second half of the time for that sort of informal conversation that we were hoping to have with everyone. And I know there's been a lot of great chat and discussion coming up in the chat box. So Aidan, I'm not sure if you want to just kind of sift through that and bring up the questions for us, or if you'd like us to do that, whatever is comfortable for you, we're happy to do. So thanks very much for your time and your attention. And again, thanks for coming tonight. And we look forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of the questions, of course, were you answered as you went along. The thing from Graham Forbes, perhaps the solution to the gender problem is to expand the definitions. What do you have? What do you have any comments on that?
I'll address that briefly. One of the difficulties of recording gender, of course, is that gender is a fluid concept, and there's almost nothing that we could use that would capture even the full range of possibilities, as well as the fact that it is not a static thing. While it may be for some of us, it isn't for many other people. So recording gender, I understand that there's this tension between wanting people to be able to find resources by particular kinds of creators, whether that be LGBTQA or just people who have disabilities, which is of course not a gender situation, or other sorts of characteristics. But one of our principles incorporates respecting creators as well, respecting agents associated with resources. So we acknowledge in our introduction too that there's a lot of tensions in cataloging, right? There's lots of tensions between what's ethical to do and what we want to do for our users, and those are the sorts of issues that we heard about that led to this effort to create a code of cataloging, a code of ethics for catalogers, is to sort of try and figure out how to mediate this tension and come up with equitable, meaningful solutions for our individual libraries and for the profession on the whole.
And I just want to also just kind of follow up on that, because Helen makes a really great point about, well, we also need to help our users find the resources, right? And that's part of our code of ethics as well, is that's like, even though it's not ranked in any particular order, that's number one. We want people to find stuff, right? But at the same time, we have to be respectful towards the creators of the resources. So there's that tension, as Beth says, right? That, I mean, how do we resolve that? And I don't think, like she said, there's no really easy answer to that. I think that sometimes at the local level, we just have to make those decisions. What's best for our user population. So, yeah.
One question I have, enterprises like this on both sides of the Atlantic, when they come to light, they sometimes send the mainstream media berserk. Have you encountered anything like that in reactions to your code of ethics?
No.
I'm very glad to hear it, or not to hear it, as you
not at all.
I'm very glad it hasn't happened. Long may this stay so.
Yeah, but I don't know. Who knows? I mean, it's still it's brand new, so there's still plenty of time for the media to get a hold of it, and who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
I think in Canada, because you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report came out in 2015, outlining you know, many recommendations for you know, many like various aspects of Canadian society to do or to take to begin reparations with Indigenous peoples. And so I think that having that federal kind of mandate or direction, or like, you know, setting the tone in a way like creates the right environment, creates the right kind of like social political space, you know, nationwide, to like then like for our workplaces and for the infrastructures that are all part of, then, you know, it's almost like an invitation, go and do better in your areas of work. So, you know, I don't know that like it's controversial so much. It's actually in Canada anyway, that's supporting something that is mandated. So we're in a way like not lucky, but I mean, it's like there's some like some work done ahead of us for us to now do this specifically. So yeah, I haven't seen anything in Canada yet, but what I always worry is about, you know, like as part of a specific institution, that we haven't done enough. And like, like, what does that mean, right? And so I would say the University of Toronto is playing a little bit of catch up, like I like citing or mentioning, calling attention to the work done by the Archival Association of Manitoba. There is to show that there are people like really active producing work. At the University of Toronto, we're still engaging people about how to make meaningful change.
And can I just say one more thing, kind of piggyback on what May was saying, just really quick, just because I think there has been a lot of emphasis on like terminology that we use, understandably, right? Terminology that we use in the catalog. But I think that one kind of, what are we trying to say, an impression that we're trying to make with this code of ethics is that it goes beyond that. Being an ethical librarian and cataloger specifically, it goes beyond just the terminology we use to like the environment that we work in, right? So as she was saying, so that's why we include statements on advocacy, not just for cataloging work, but for our fellow, library professionals or paraprofessionals even, to make a better and more ethical workplace. And that was somewhat controversial, that inclusion, but we felt that was extremely important to highlight. So just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out.
Could I also just chip in there as well, because I think from a UK perspective, and I'm sure it applies elsewhere, if you think about the bulk of the metadata or the records that are produced for commercial publishing, they're starting their life within the publishing industry. So in terms of collaboration, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for libraries, anyone working in galleries, libraries, archives, museums, to actually work across sector boundaries and to work also with our colleagues in the publishing industry. Because I attended a ProQuest event this afternoon where they were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of publishing. So they have people from the publishers there, and they talked about how can we get data from authors that's not that legally that we can ask authors. So things like sexuality, ethnicity, religion, all of that, very sensitive. In some countries, you cannot ask people that information. So it was very interesting that all of this was coming out, because obviously this relates quite closely to things like our authority control in our library catalogues. And it harks back to the working group that I was the liaison for, where they were talking about when the Library of Congress or anyone involved in the NACO programme creates a record for an author, it's summed up really as just because you can put that information in there doesn't mean that you have to or should. So it's back to this idea of you must respect the agents that have created these resources. But I think there's a really good way for us now to collaborate with our colleagues in the publishing industry and to maybe come up with some joint initiatives in that area.
Not to Jane, to put you on the spot, Christine has a great question here in the chat. I mean, I can talk to that, but I know that that's something that we've talked about, Jane, about the, that our work or just the language of critical cataloging is designed in a way to kind of make it feel like they're attacking the work of the past generation of catalogers. And I understand that concern. And once again, my fellow committee members can jump in as well. But I don't think that's necessarily the intent, is to just, to place blame on people of the past, but really try to get people to rethink the work now and going forward. Like, how can we do better? Yes, in the past, there were some people who were, racist and sexist and so forth. There are a lot of people who weren't, right? That were just kind of following the rules and so forth and not doing anything intentionally, to harm. But we need to be more mindful now. But anyone feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I would support that as well, Karen. I think, it's sort of like with the cataloging community making these efforts towards with RDA and 3R and all of these sort of things where it's meant to kind of move us into the current or the present or the future, whatever it turns out to be with current standards and the evolving standards, that I feel like there is a need as well for not just for that to change, but also for looking at how we do representation. Because even if we looked at current catalogers and past catalogers and how people cataloged, 50 years ago, it's still really different 50 years ago than if we looked back to the original dictionary catalogs from hundreds of years ago, right? And so we just have to, I think, accept that this is part of the evolution of our profession, and that, so I've been doing a lot of work myself, personally, my own research around the need for inclusive access and inclusive representation, but also being neutral in the sense that we don't want to try to, I guess, sort of disadvantage certain ways of thinking about anything, while also including different points of view and different approaches to seeing the world at the same time. And so with the previous standards that we worked to for decades, that doesn't really allow for that type of inclusive representation and discovery that we want to see now in the current age, if that makes sense to everyone, and if anyone else in the committee has anything to add to that, I'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah, I like to speak to it. Christine, it's a great question. And I also read, for me, I not only are there people who are concerned with maybe perhaps this unintended criticism of the past, but some people react to, well, what about the thing I did 5 years ago? So there's also the recent past, right, which is actually people now. And so, I've had my fair share of conversations with offending colleagues without any intention. And so, how do we alleviate these concerns? I'll be speaking more to it at the Festival of Pride event that Diane had promoted earlier. But in a nutshell, I would say we don't focus on individual intents. We focus on the fact that we were, and we continue to be, even if we're trying to be more critical, embedded in imperfect structures that do tend to favor certain groups of people over others. And so if we are able to look at things systemically and holistically, I hope that maybe people would say, okay, being sexist or racist or discriminatory aside, there's even just the basic problem of inadequate description, right? Just not enough. But then, if you're a cataloger whose staff, whose department was decimated by the economy, and then there was no support for that work. Well, what do you call that? So I would say we did our best during those times, but we also have to remember we operate in imperfect structures. This is not to let people off the hook so much as is to remind us that there's a lot of factors at play. There's not just the use of language, but the use of time and money. I think one recurring concern that we saw in various venues of feedback is, how do we make time to mindfully describe something? How do we find time to consult with an author or the creator to find out intent if something's not clear? And these are really great questions. So one of the strategies of this committee is also to speak to administrators and leaders and managers about this issue. So to crack that conversation open, it's not just the responsibility of catalogers. There's systems at play.
Another question's come up here from Henry Bolshaw. As the code correctly says, we are all biased, and so are our standards. So his question is, what biases, if any, do you think exist in the Code of Ethics?
I'm happy to take this one if that's okay with the rest of the committee. I think it's a great question, Henry, and I think something that's come up often, and rightfully so, is that we are a committee that is very much Anglo-centric, despite our best efforts. We are a very white, all-female committee, and that has definitely, I'm sure, colored and influenced the final code. I don't think it's possible to write a code that is unbiased in any sense, because we are human beings, and that is the nature of humans, to be biased. I think part of our job now, as we are looking for case studies and looking for continuing feedback and presentations like this, is to find those weaknesses and use the case studies to fill those gaps. So if you have a concern that you don't think is represented, we'd love to see it as a case study that we can say, hey, we might have missed this particular concern, but here is other ways the code can address it, if that makes sense.
And that might be a good fodder for, the revision, right? This is not a code that's supposed to stand throughout the rest of time, right? It needs to be updated over time. And so if there's a clear gap, then whoever, I guess not us probably, but someone in the future who revises this code will hopefully take that into consideration. So who knows?
Ooh. There's another question come up from Emma Booth. I am concerned about the huge amount of externally created and externally managed metadata that we are piping into our discovery layers for e-resources, as we cannot control or update this metadata in the same way local catalog records. We need publishers, content providers and discovery service providers to join this initiative so that the metadata in their knowledge bases follows ethical principles too. Oh, that's
can I just jump in on that one? It sort of harks back to what I was saying about the ProQuest event I went to this afternoon. I think it's down to collaboration, and I think it's about persistence. There has been, I think, in the past, a general tendency to have publishers and content providers on one side and libraries as customers on the other side. But I think the key here is collaboration, and it's mobilizing the library community to think about the business relationship that they're in, as well as these, which is also an ethical consideration if you think about it. We're spending our institution's money on buying content, systems, various integrations. But are we addressing the fundamentals when we're making those decisions? So is the metadata up for it? Can it do the job that we need it to do? There's little point in buying content if then the records are not there in the discovery system or in the knowledge base that you're using. So I think Emma's point is bang on, but the only way that we're going to counter that is to actually mobilize and be a bit more business-like in our relationships with our suppliers, maybe. Certainly it's something, and challenge. I think maybe that's the other thing. There's a lot of money involved in all of this. So that at least should be able to garner some support from your management layer. Because if you make them sit down and think about all the investment they put into the system, the content, and then your time in having to continually lobby to get the metadata to a standard included in your knowledge bases, because otherwise the alternative is you have to take it and locally manage it, which also has a cost, then I think that's one route into having those discussions. In the UK, we're lucky to have consortia. I think we have to leverage that and make the most of those relationships and our joint concerns.
Sorry, I was muted there. If I could just step on that a bit as well. Within MDG as a committee, and Emma is luckily one of our committee members who's been working on this. It's something that we're doing actively currently at the moment, which Jane started for us, and we're going forward with this now as well. Now that Jane stepped down, is working collaboratively through CILIP and making connections with vendors and standards organizations. So for example, Emma and I presented a session together at the NISO Plus conference a few months ago on metadata quality, including the sort of on-ground work that she's been doing with NEG, and the work that I do as a lecturer and a former cataloger, but what I teach with my students in terms of creating good metadata quality records and cataloging records. And I'm currently in conversation with the help of CILIP with Nielsen Book as a provider of so many of our records. And they're interested in what MDG has to say. So we have a meeting coming up with a few of our committee members, along with CILIP headquarters and along with Nielsen Book, to kind of get our input on what they could be doing better or differently to enhance better discovery, whatever that means for everyone. So there is, I think, an advocacy role to play for us as MDG within the UK. And I would think that my colleagues in Canada and the US that are also on this committee would also be interested in doing that as well. But you know, this is an international, that it does take an international effort to have these things take place. I've done a lot of work with my students on looking at records in other languages. So non-Roman languages, how they use mark differently, how they do representation differently, and they don't always match up. So if you're interested in the language aspect, I will be talking about that much more next week at the Pride event that was mentioned earlier. So, but yeah, these are all things that we need to continue to work with going forward.
There's another question that's come up. It's a data librarian. I the whole questioner's identity. It's a data librarian. We are all over the world dealing with the change in the law about personal information, especially GDPR and its influence via the funders' requirements. So these issues are coming up all over. How deal with GDPR and other laws in connection with metadata?
Could you be a bit more specific about that? Because GDPR is particular to Europe in terms of legislation. Could you maybe clarify that a bit, please?
So we have our own Protection Act coming in now, which is being enacted on the 30th of July. So the whole of the South African community that deals with information or data or research is basically hysterical. Across all of our information systems, we suddenly have to have ethics that we never had before. We never had to ask, do we have the right to hold this piece of information about somebody? We never had to ask, are we holding it about or what? And it is linked to ethics. You know, you can call it personal protection. And I don't think that our regulator is that interested in the library metadata records, right? But overall, as we are running through, GDPR affects us in South Africa because our funders are mainly outside South Africa. So you may think, I just wanted to encourage you on the sort of central levels, you may think these things only affect you, but they don't, because we inherit them via our funders, via our people doing due diligence, via a collaborator in another university, and they go, well, you now have to adhere to this. So we're getting a lot of questions, we're getting a lot of procedural questions about how we hold data and how we manage data across this. So what I was wondering, why I came to the session, is I thought, well, maybe this code of ethics, we can say, well, we adhere to this code of ethics as honesty, as part of a compliance process. We have to have some kind of compliance. What is our compliance with protection of personal? So sorry, that's a very long statement. We are still trying to figure out how we are going to make this happen in a real life practice.
Right. No, that's helpful. What I can say myself is, when I used to be a practicing working librarian, whatever that means, when I was still in America, we had the Patriot Act after 9/11, right? And the Patriot Act was something that was passed as a piece of legislation immediately in response to 9/11, which then said that anyone could come in from the government and take whatever data we held in the library about our patrons. And so our policy at the university library that I worked at the time was, if we don't hold the information, we can't hand it over to the government. And therefore we're protecting privacy by not keeping everything. So somebody checks out something, once they return it, we delete that record of them ever having that item. And so if we don't have it, we can't provide it. So it would be interesting, I think, for me at least, to know kind of, because you're completely right that things like GDPR and these other legislations are not insular to any particular country or continent, because we're also globally connected at the moment. But I think in your case, it would be interesting to know more about the legislation that's coming in for you in South Africa and how that differs from GDPR and Data Protection Act in Europe and the UK. And, my immediate reaction is just not to save anything that they don't want to have saved, as long as it doesn't impact the experience of your users in any particular way. And that's certainly not directive, but it's just, from my experience, it seems to be a workaround. I don't know if my committee members have anything else to suggest.
I think I was particularly wondering, I was looking for a more library-based compliance, rather than us just sort of sticking to some kind of legal compliance. And I was wondering if we could use this code of ethics as, in fact, to say, well, because they've asked us, what is your standard and where's your code of conduct?
Right.
And so and in your code of conduct, then you are safe.
And I think that's something similar.
Then this is our.
Yeah, no, sorry. I think that's something similar to, depending on whichever professional body you belong to. So whether it's the CILIP Code of Ethics or the ALA Code of Ethics, or the main Code of Ethics by professional bodies, I think that this is something that I can't speak because I wasn't there in the very beginning, and maybe our co-chairs can speak to this a bit better. But I think that was kind of something that we could be able to take this document and take it to our employers and say, this is what in our area, that this is what we want to use as our code of practice, and have it as, sort of a formally approved statement that could back up our decisions in our workplaces. Karen and Beth, do you guys want to speak to that at all?
I'll just briefly mention that sort of what Diane's talking about is what's happening at my institution. So I'm a librarian at Emory University, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. And we have taken up the code, I was not the instigator here, but our head of cataloging in the main library was really interested in the code. And so we actually are starting to implement it. And of course, as with any code, there's low-hanging fruit, right? There's things that you're already doing. And then there's the things that are really difficult, but and that require actual change. But we also feel like by sort of signing on to the code and implementing it for ourselves, that it does become a code of conduct. And in its inception, coming up with the code of ethics for catalogers was about creating a professional entity that was cohesive and had sort of a document by which to make decisions. And so that sort of the cohesion of cataloging and metadata as a work group and as a profession that people are employed in as any kind of library worker who knows metadata, to be that kind of backup, right? To be that kind of reference when we encounter other sort of outside influences that want us to make other kinds of decisions. I'm not, we all catalog under our local laws, and there's not much to be done for that, right? And in some cases that's a good thing. But I think in its original plan, this was meant to be a document that sort of has our backs in some respects when we talk to administration and other sorts of external entities from our library. I don't know if that completely helps you, but that was part of the original idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Beth. Thank you, Jane, Diane, Karen, May, Sarah. You can see how full the screen is. You can see how full the chat is. You can see how the hour filled with questions and discussion on this very important topic. Thank you for what you brought. It's been recorded. It has been recorded. Now, the next ILIG informal, I believe, is in September. All I can say at the moment is I've been following the discussion here. I haven't been looking at things like that. Look at the ILIG Twitter feed. Look at our page. Thanks again to you cataloging gurus for coming along and sharing your insights tonight in a wonderful talk. And you see what people are saying about it in the chat. Diane, if you hand the hosting back to me, I'll be able to wrap up as you've filled our hour very well, and let's show is in the usual way. I can outclap a village hall. I'm not.
I think you are host again, so thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thanks all for coming. And so I will end it there. Thanks again to our gurus. Thanks to all the audience. And I think that's everybody involved. So I'll wrap there and I'll click on end. And I look forward to seeing some of you again in September. Okay.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.